The book is divided in two distinct parts. The first part is called karma. Conventionally, most people think of karma as action. Actually, karma is patterns of thought and action blended together. Patterns of action creating impressions in your mind as thought. So, karma is essentially the DNA of your thought action combined in the past that impacts your behavior, your thoughts, your actions for the future. For instance, if you say that I am a coffee drinker and I have been drinking coffee for years and I'm habituated to drinking coffee, I'm a coffee addict, I don't like tea at all. So coffee drinking becomes your karma because the impressions of the past, which are embedded in your mind and your motor organs, have created the impetus for the future. So the moment you say the business does not work anymore in COVID times, you're essentially saying business as usual does not work anymore. Karma of business of the past does not reflect precisely, accurately on the demands of the future because the future does not exist in the way the past was. So the word karma essentially pitchforks this simple truth that the context of business, the context of leading, context of managing, context of doing things from the past does not work for the future. We are beautifully prepared for a future which does not exist anymore. And therefore, the word karma in Karma Sutras tries to decode the very core of what does not work. The second part of the book is called Sutras. In simple language, sutras translated into English roughly means thread. Look at the thread of a necklace that contains all the pearls. Look at the thread that has all the flowers put together in a garland. Now, the thread is the hidden insight that you have that holds form and phenomena together. These sutras are the solutions to the karmic problems that we have acquired over the years. And so, Karma Sutras put together decodes the past and shows a clear pathway for action choices that leaders and young managers will have for the future. That's how the book becomes relevant for our uncertain times, because in uncertain times you have to understand what does not work anymore, but more importantly, what would work going forward. Young managers must learn to hit deeper chords in human nature before they learn to hit targets.
Poetry encourages self-reflection. Good evening and welcome to Studio 2. Today we have with us Mr. Randhir Khare. Randhir Khare is a national and international award-winning poet, artist, folklorist whose work has been set to music by A.R. Rahman. He's founded Mystic, a poetry music band, and After Rumi. His latest volumes of poems and drawings were released this year, and his personal story, The Flood and After, and a memoir of leaving will be releasing soon. We also have with us Suhit Kelkar. Suhit Kelkar is a writer based out of Mumbai. His journalism, poems, and short stories appear in Indian and foreign publications. We have with us Dr. Santosh Bakaya. Dr. Santosh Bakaya is a poet, essayist, novelist, creative writing mentor, and a TEDx speaker. Recipient of many national and international awards, he runs a very popular column, Morning Mentorings in Learning and Creative.com. He's written more than 20 books across various genres. Today's discussion will be led by Anirban Bhattacharya. Anirban is the number one best-selling author of true crime book The Deadly Dozen, India's most notorious serial killers. He's the co-creator, producer and writer of the television show Savdhan India and is also the producer of the Crime Patrol and Fear Files. He's also been the head of non-fiction content and brand solutions at Walt Disney Company India.
Awesome, awesome. Audio all clear? You can hear me, Santosh
Yes, we
ji?
can hear
Yes,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
First of all, a quick apology from Suhit. He will not be able to join us because his pet was very ill, and so he had to rush the pet off to the hospital, and so he's not going to be joining us this session. Second of all, Dr. Santosh Bakaya ji, is she, or she could be gender fluid? That's fine. We just wanted to address that.
it's
Santosh ji,
okay.
Randhir ji, welcome. All right. Welcome to the people who are watching this. Welcome to the Pune International Literary Festival 2021. We are back. And the session is going to be called The Power of Poem. And we have with us, as you know, Dr. Santosh Bakaya ji, and we've got with us Randhir Khare ji. The introductions have already been shared. Um, just a quick a quotation to start off with. In an article in New York Times, I think uh, it said, "Poetry is ordinary language raised to the ninth power. Poetry is born with ideas, nerved and blooded with emotions, all held together by the delicate, tough skin of words." And that's what we're going to be discussing today about poetry and poems. Um, Salman Rushdie said, to define the role of a poet, Salman Rushdie said that a poet's work is to name the unnameable, to point at frauds, to take sides, start arguments, shape the world, and stop it from going to sleep. Now, in an era, pre-independence, where there was no technology, we've had the role of the poet, which was very strong. Bismil Azimabadi, Sarforoshi ki Tamanna, Jhanda Ucha Rahe, Hamara by Shamlal Gupta, Where the Mind is Without Fear by Tagore, inspired the youth of pre-independence India. But do you think that the role of the poet is still as important as it was in the era without technology and free information? Do poems still have the power to ignite revolutions? Are poets still revolutionaries? Are poets relevant in this day, or are poets redundant? Whoever wants to go first.
Santosh, why don't
Anirban,
you?
Hanji.
okay, may I start?
Yeah.
Hanji.
Okay. First of all, I'm Santosh Bakaya and I am a she. Uh, so, poetry, I believe, is that itching in the fingers, that churning in the heart, and that it is that confused babble of voices, which just try to break free of the shackles and they hunt for open spaces for liberation. And poets still matter, poetry still matters. There are revolutionary poets still alive, still uh, singing of revolution, still talking of revolution. And we just had this wonderful dreamer. She died recently, Bell Hooks, and she was talking, she was singing, she was writing poetry with a singeing moral clarity, and she said that we are women, all of us, we have the rights. She talked of the rights, and they talked of revolution. Through the written word, we can revolutionize the world. We can, all of us, the poets are still, the written word has magic. The written word is miraculous. And I keep saying that we are not wordsmiths, we are swordsmiths. We have the words can be used as hammers, they can be used as swords to change this world, to revolutionize this world, and to hammer away at the fascism, at the dystopian world that we see all around us. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that a poem is much bigger than a poet. And that's what Yeats said, and I've always agreed with him. Because the power of the poem makes the poet who he is or she is. Because the poem comes through the poet when the poet is ready for the poem. The poet doesn't sit and pen words and pen whatever. It's the poem that makes its presence felt. And I think that it comes to the very famous quote I keep quoting, and that is, a poem must not mean but be. When we tackle poetry, I mean, if it's the poet writing, the poet is saying something. It means this, it means this, it means this, and it means this. But when left to poetry and that instinct and the power of emotion and the power of vision that comes through poetry is when it bees, when it is. And that is far beyond, far beyond the power of ordinary mortals. And if you're lucky, you are able to harness it. If you're not, you're a mere quibbler of words.
That's lovely, the way you've put it. But do you think that poetry and poets are relevant in this day and age, or are we redundant?
We are always relevant. We're always relevant. It just depends in what manner we are relevant. I mean, we can't be as relevant as in, pre-independence in times of revolution. We can't be as relevant in the manner that, Neruda was reciting poetry, or Yevgeny Yevtushenko. 4,000 people in a sports stadium, he recited his poems to. It was revolutionary. Today, I believe that poetry helps an internal revolution, a humanizing of the human being, a bringing us back to our center. Poetry is medicine. Poetry is healing. Poetry brings us to truths which we keep running away from and getting ourselves involved with the world. Poetry is an anchor.
Nice. Santoshji, I'd like to ask you the same thing. What does actually poetry mean to you?
I agree with each and every word of.
I agree too. I also
Yeah,
agree.
and
But
let me.
please disagree also.
No, I don't want to disagree, because this is what poetry is all about. It is healing, it is emotional, it is soul stirring, it is therapeutic. And let me cite two examples, if I may, Anirban.
Yes,
If I
please,
may.
please,
So I
please.
was 6 years back, I was in my MPhil class, and this boy, he had the audacity to tell me, "Ma'am, आप केवल गांधी की बातें करते हो, आप Martin Luther King की बातें करते हो, and I have not read anything about Gandhi, I have not read anything about King, and I'll read about Gandhi only when you write a poetic biography of Mahatma Gandhi." So he said this with an arrogant air, saying that मैं तो कवि हूँ, I'm a poet and I can understand only poetry. So initially I gave him a tongue lashing, but then this set me thinking, because I used to write limericks, so I started thinking of writing a poetic biography of Mahatma Gandhi in the AABBA rhyme scheme. There was a man from Nantucket who kept all his cash in a bucket. He had a daughter named Nan who ran away with the man, and as for the bucket, Nan took it. So limericks were meant to lampoon people. But through this AABBA rhyme scheme, I wrote an entire biography of Mahatma Gandhi, and it was completed in 2.5 years. It was published by Vedasta Publishers, and Tushar Gandhiji wrote the foreword to it, and it has a poetic foreword too. So, and the first copy of this, I gifted it to my MPhil student, and he was a critic of Mahatma Gandhi. He read the entire book, it was poetry, and he said, "Madam, क्या आप मुझे इजाजत देंगे मैं इसको translate करूँ हिंदी में?" So, and he is now a Gandhian. He teaches Gandhian. He teaches Gandhian studies in one of the colleges here in Jaipur. So this is the power of poetry. So he was, and through this book, I have, I don't know, but I have made changes in the mindsets of many a youngster. And if you will allow me to continue, Anirban, let me also tell you something else. I was at the Sark Sufi Festival in the year 2017, and there was this man. He was standing right in front of me, and he was looking at me continuously. I was wondering why he was looking at me, and then he approached me. He said, "Madam, are you Taslima Nasreen?" I said, "नहीं, मैं Taslima Nasreen नहीं हूँ, लेकिन आप कोई हैं." So then he suddenly apologized, and he pulled out 3 books from his handbag, and he had 3 copies of Ballad of Bapu with him. He said, "I want your autographs on 3 copies. One is my wife's, one is mine, and one is my daughter's. All 3 of us are lecturers in government colleges here." So that was such a humbling experience, and this is all because of poetry, and this is all because the fact that I wrote this poetic biography of Mahatma Gandhi, and I was surprised. I was surprised. I was, in fact, stunned into speechlessness because people bought it, people read it, and it became a bestseller. And this is the power of poetry.
Yes,
Super.
poetry has a tremendous power, and for me, in my life, it has the power of healing. When I had a complete mental breakdown many years ago in the 90s, I had nothing to turn to. I was by myself in the city of Mumbai, and I refused to talk to anyone. I hardly ate. I didn't bathe. The house was stinking, and I just let myself be. Birds were flying through the 5th floor apartment of mine. And then one day, I got up. I didn't know what I was going to write, and I began to write. And a poem, a 9-part poem, happened. Now, that for me was a healing, a very deep healing. My first poem I wrote was in reaction to a teacher who slapped me. In those days, you were allowed to slap and kick and thump and whatever and cane. And I got slapped unnecessarily. The poem was not rebellious. I was 11 years old. The poem was about the beauty of the sky and the freedom it afforded birds and life. So poetry has always come to my rescue and has been a sense of tremendous power. So there are poets who are public poets, and there are poets who are intensely intimate in their communication through poetry. And I am more or less of the second variety, but I have read my work to large groups of people, performed my work. But the thing is, it's the purity of the personal experience of poetry, which I believe is its most powerful.
Right. Which somehow you seem to have preempted my next question. You're a genius. Sorry, Santosh, you were trying to say something.
May I add something more to this?
Yes.
The therapeutic value of poetry.
Yeah.
When I lost my mother in the year 2015, I was completely devastated. I did not know how to deal with this tragedy. And then I started writing poems on my mother. And the first poem that I wrote on Facebook, I've lost it somewhere. So many friends, my Facebook friends, they messaged me, they wrote to me saying that the poem resonated with them, and all of them are my friends now, very good friends. So in this book, the latest book, Runcible Spoons and Pea Green Boats, I have written many of my poems which were written during that time. So it was very therapeutic for me, writing poems about my mom, about my dad, and it helped me. It pulled me from the depths into which I had fallen. So poetry can be very therapeutic. It can be very soul stirring.
Yeah, so
You
it's
were
my
saying
next
something,
question.
Anirban.
Yes. This was my follow up to the question. I mean, to your answer was, should poets and poetry be just personal, or do poets still have a social and moral role to play and fulfill. And so therefore it sort of the poets therefore choose what to write about. There's that baggage of being a poet and having a social relevance or a moral relevance of being the voice of the conscience and blah 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 blah. But what you're saying is that there are two kinds of poets. One is a personal and one is a performance slash public poet.
Yeah.
But do you think that?
I want to interrupt you here. Sorry,
Yeah,
an
yeah,
idea came to me. May I interrupt you?
absolutely. It's
Okay.
your session.
You see, the thing is, it's like this. I feel the universal is in the particular. So the more particular you are, the more specific you are about certain feelings, certain emotions, certain ideas, more specific, mind you, it becomes, the more honest, it becomes more universal. You take all the confessional poets who wrote in absolute isolation, theirs is the most universal in its appeal. So it's the other way around also that happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Santosh ji, what do you feel that, I mean, do poets, uh, you know, need to fulfill a certain, obligation or responsibility?
As far as I'm concerned, I just write. As I repeatedly keep saying that I'm a mad hatter of sorts. There's a mad streak in me. I write whatever comes to my heart, and the head does not interfere. So whatever I write, it resonates with people because it comes from the heart. And I also say this, that when I write, my heart does the writing, my head sits pillion. So my head doesn't do anything but. Uh, I have seen that my poetry has appealed to people because it comes from the heart, and some people also say that there's a certain moral clarity in your poetry. I don't want to say that. I do not sermonize, but what I write comes from my heart, and it appeals to people. That's all. And they so many people and I have written certain poems which have come back to me unacknowledged in WhatsApp messages, because this is because those poems have appealed to the consciousness of people. They have stirred the souls of people somewhere.
Right. Robert Frost, again, I love this quote by Robert Frost. He said, poetry is a way of taking life by the throat, by, literally going for the jugular, so to speak. Um, do you think that poetry has to always be a reflection of life or reality? In the sense, if fiction books can talk about a fictional world and imagination and all of that, why do you think that there is always I mean, why does people expect poetry to be rooted in reality, or does it need to be?
No, it doesn't need to be rooted in reality at all. It
Or
is
about life?
rooted.
Or about life?
Yes, it is rooted in the life that the poet experiences. Now, you may experience life in one way. I will experience life in one way. Bakaya will experience life in another way. So life is not the same to everybody. We choose to respond to certain things. Now, as a poet, for example, I have a book, Memory Land. This is about the life of the forest of Dangs in South Gujarat. Yeah, and every little element of that is of the forest, whether it is waterfalls, whether it's forest fires, whether it's shamans, whoever it is celebrated. Now, my point over here is that the poet, we are forgetting here, is also a witness, also a witness of the exterior of life, of the interior of life, of the intuitions of that life gives us, of the horrors that life gives us. So we, as much as we engage in life, we are also witnesses of life. And I think that's what gives us such an important role in society. Poets, we stand aside, we witness life, we are actually engaging in life in our own poetic way.
Right. Santosh ji?
Yes, I once again agree with whatever he has said. But let me tell you that in three of my books, Under the Apple Boughs, Where Are the Lilacs, and Songs of Belligerence, all these are based on reality. Whatever has happened around us, whatever the dystopia we see around us, it is all about that. The horror in Kashmir, the uh, the ravages of war. I talk about the ravages of war and where are the lilacs and their examples from real life. The horror in Kashmir, the incarcerated life in Kashmir. I talk about that. That is the real part. And and also in Runcible Spoons, that is my personal book. But this Oh Hawk, and as Anirban, you have read it, it's pure madness. It's pure madness. It is fantasy. It is surreal, and uh, there is just a tiny bit of reality there. And it is just surreal. It's a fantasy land where there's a person who is hunting for some lost thing, and whatever that lost thing is, it's a quest. It is a quest, and it is just fantasy where there are certain reincarnations of characters from classical literature. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
please, sorry.
sorry, you were saying something, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so see, my point over here is that you are responding to life. Okay, you are responding to Bakaya. You are responding to certain aspects of life, certain specific aspects of life, certain stories, certain legends, or whatever you are responding to. I respond to the inner life of my reality. Yeah, in my, like, for example, in my book on the Dang's Memory Land, I'm not just talking about the environment in a idyllic way, but I'm talking about the spirit of that environment. And I think that's what poets have to do more and more, to capture the spirit of the environment, because everybody's waving flags and talking about the environment, carbon footprints, etc. The poets can lead the way here. The poets can create the feeling, the poets can create the power of the need of now, and not just survival, but permanence for the future. So that is it's a very powerful medium. Poetry is a very powerful medium, and I've been trying to do this with poems on environment, which is in my book of poems, Memory Land, and another more later book. It's called Traveling Light, and it's bits and pieces and experiences of my life, of my beliefs, etc. However, it has an underlying philosophy. It seems that today most poets are scared of the mystic and the philosophical. They feel it need to be clever and sharp and angry and what have you, and are afraid to be purely metaphysical, to go deeper, because that's not in nowadays. Nowadays are the urban poets to a great extent. And at that, I rue at the moment. That
Mm,
role, that powerful role that the poet can play, is slowly edging away.
right. Plato said that poetry is nearer to the vital truth than history. Um, and now I ask this next question as a complete simpleton, someone supposedly a layman, right? Saying कि poets को एक unnecessary, there is an additional aura of intellectual
Yeah.
nature attached to the poet, and usko what we call in Bengali atel. If you've heard that word before, that intellectual, मैंने एक poet माने ही वो झोला होगा और intellectual होगा और वो सब कुछ वही होगा. Or how far of that do you think is true, or you've experienced?
may Anirban,
Yes,
may
Santosh ji. हाँ जी, हाँ जी.
I? I proclaim from the rooftops that I have a mad streak in me. I'm a mad hatter, and I do not carry a jhola anywhere. And it is always my heart doing the talking, and my daughter is listening from the other room, and my husband is listening in the other room. and all of them think that I'm insane, and they have to.
That's why they're in two separate rooms from you.
Yeah, exactly. And my daughter warned me, Mama, don't try to be a social embarrassment. So I can be that too.
Oh, I love being social
So
embarrassments.
and whenever I write, as I said earlier, I sometimes I write with a raw intensity, and I do not even edit what I have written. So it goes to the publishers like that, and it's published. And I'm so happy to see that people like it. That it's edited, of course, but there's a certain rawness in those poems, which my grammar Nazi husband in the other room and my grammar Nazi daughter in the other room, they feel embarrassed about at times. But this is the way I am. I I do
Right.
not allow my
I'd
head to
like
do
to
the
come
talking.
back to Ariban's question.
Yes.
Yeah, you had a question before she began to talk, a
Yeah.
reflection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Yep.
I'd like to address that.
Yes.
Maybe earlier, at earlier times, decades ago, the poet had this aura around him or her, this sort of an aura, this sort of specialness around them.
Mm.
But I don't think so today. Today, the poets are either in small clustered cliques in the urban areas, in desolate places in rural areas or semi rural areas. And that is no more there. And what in fact is beginning to happen is like what happened in Neruda's time, the poet as statesman, the poet as politician. We know writers who are politicians, right? The
Mhm.
poet who playing all of these roles, who is
Mhm.
also a poet.
Mm.
And unfortunately, most times that sort of poetry is little wanting.
Mm.
Yeah. So to answer your question, there's it may be some cultures that I'm not aware of in this country where the poets have that halo. They don't anymore. They're pretty naked, if you ask me.
Now, coming to nakedness, do you think we've in India especially we've grown up with the power of the word, right? Whether it be the epic poems, that we've grown up on through oral traditions, and then later on through written poems. Um, do you think that changing times have forced the poet to censor himself or herself because of whatever external pressures there might be, and they can't obviously voice their
See,
opinions, whether it be
there are
political
two
or
issues
social.
here. There are two issues over here. One is wanting to write and sound like somebody else in order to be acceptable, no matter what you're writing. That's one thing a lot of
Hmm.
poets are tending to do now. But self censorship in the world is happening huge in the old Eastern Europe bloc. Because when I was in Bulgaria, traveling in Bulgaria, reading my work, it's quite some time ago, they told me that no, we don't have any censorship here. I said, what do you mean? They said, no, we don't have censorship because we censor ourselves.
Hmm.
Now, when I went to the then Czechoslovakia, nobody had time to censor. They just picked them up and they locked them up. They went into dungeons and went into whatever. This is in the 80s. So that was a strain. Now it's everything is hanging out. There's a very little issues of poetic censorship unless the issues are political. Unless the poetry is political, unless it's got something touching on religion, or women are writing and certain about certain issues, sexuality or whatever, and it's not acceptable, then there's an issue. And
Right.
people are really careful.
Right. Nietzsche said, poets are shameless with their experiences; they exploit them. Do you think, as poets, poets are generally like self-flagellating people, sympathizing, playing, you know, uh, making themselves more miserable that they that then than they are, to sort of get the word across? Do you think we really exploit our emotions to write poetry?
See,
At least I
60s.
don't.
Yes.
Yes, Santoshji.
don't. I don't. I don't do that. On the basis of my personal experience, I'm saying I don't do that.
Right.
No, no. I'm saying that in the 60s, it was angry poetry. Okay, so the more angry you were, the more authentic your voice was. In Kolkata, we had the hungry poets, and they came over there and they would go into nightclubs and they would take the mic and recite poetry about hunger and whatever and whatever. In the 70s, there was it was all about liberty, all about opening the world, all about being equal, about hearing, having your voice heard. By the 80s, it was gone. Most of it was gone. Most of the poets had got civilized and absorbed into advertising and into all of the others. And by the 90s, there were stragglers in various places. So that's what happened actually. So the poets, it's very difficult to say now as a trend whether that's what the poets, do. But
Mm,
at least I don't, because I write about whatever comes to me.
right. My father will be very happy because you mentioned the hungry poets of
Yeah.
Kolkata, because he says that they didn't get their due and they've been forgotten, in the
Absolutely.
history, and we've sort of forgotten them. Coming to what you just said about, do you believe in the muse, or at the end of the day, is poetry about just craftsmanship and trying to?
No, no,
Uh,
no, no, no. I
is there a
react.
muse?
There is a muse. But the muse is not the way we think the muse is, the muse will come in and visit you and whatever. It's just a way of saying. But it's a state of mind. But I will it's a state of mind. And if you are in the right state of mind, you will write brilliantly. If you are not in the right state of mind and you're thinking about this, that, and the other, your next paycheck, then you
Or the
would
EMI,
crafting. You just be crafting.
the home loan?
Yes.
Uh,
Santosh ji,
Anirban,
Hanji.
my memories are my muse. My memories of Kashmir, my memories of my childhood, the nature of Kashmir. I was not born in Kashmir, but I have my roots in Kashmir. And my papa and my granny and my mother, they used to talk a lot about Kashmir. So those memories of Kashmir are my muse, and nature all around, they are my muses. So I get inspiration from there, from nature, and from my memories, my childhood memories. I had a very happy childhood. So they trigger this memory avalanche with those childhood chunks, and I start writing. Sometimes I get a bit free and start writing.
There's a situation. Sorry, I'll just
No, no,
small.
absolutely. Go
Uh,
ahead.
there was a poet a younger poet. He used to show his work to T.S. Eliot. Yeah, and then one day he came to Eliot and said, this is. Eliot used to mostly humor people he wasn't sure of or he thought was a bit charlatans. So Eliot said, "How long you've been writing for?" He asked him. He said, "Oh well, I've been writing for 5 years, whatever." He said, "Yeah, I've seen some of your earlier poems. They're pretty good. But, friend, let me tell you, the muse has abandoned you." That's all he said. Yeah, that's a very broad way of putting it, but that's the way it was.
Right.
Anirban, may I intrude? I want Mr.
Absolutely.
Khare to recite his poems. And
Right.
you
We'll
too.
we'll we'll finish. Yeah, we'll finish the questions, and if there's time, we'll let you
Yes, yes. I think let's
recite.
let's work on the questions first. So there's
Yeah,
more interaction and yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Do you now? Robert Frost has said that writing free verse is like playing tennis with the net down. Do you
Yes.
believe that? Does poetry need to have a rhyme scheme? Need to have a rhythm or cadence? And why can't it be free verse? Is it
It can be
inferior?
free
Free
verse.
verse poetry is free verse poetry inferior to those that are, you
No,
know?
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
The other formal forms of poetry are all mostly stuck up, according to me, because you get obsessed with the structure, obsessed with the rhyme, obsessed with the rhyme scheme, and you miss the point. And the point is to allow the energy that comes with an authentic voice, an authentic poem to flow. And you'll find a lot of rust on mending a wall. A brilliant line, something that doesn't love a wall and wants it down. I mean, it evokes so much. So I don't think a poem should be depending on structure alone, but on spirit, which has an inbuilt rhythm. It's an inbuilt rhythm. It's nothing, it's not some frill that is there.
Santoshji, you write in a structure. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. I think your mic's just.
This is in a structure. Ballad of Bapu is in structure, but the other books are not. They are free verse, all of them. And there is a certain inherent lyrical cadence in my poetry, but they adhere to structure, the AABB rhyme scheme, and here we have the quatrain. So I
What do you find easier to write in? Naturally, what do you find easier to write in? In a
free
structure or free?
verse. Free verse. But I was obsessed with the limericks as a child. So that also came naturally to me. AABBA. So I used to
Right.
talk in limericks at a time. So now I write free verse.
Right. We're talking about the power of the poem or the written word. Who are the powerful poets who have influenced you or you love? How has impacted your life? Let's talk about that.
Okay, I would like to mention a poet who I never knew existed, and in the middle of my life, I discovered her completely by accident, and that is the German Jewish poet Nelly Sachs. There's no rhyme, there's no rhythm, there's nothing but the sheer power of image and thought. It's absolutely amazing. She really impacted my poetry. Neruda did, Quasimodo did, Apollinaire did, all a lot of them did. And I think more closer home, I am very moved by the work of Adil Jasawala. He writes in a different way altogether, but there is a certain inherent authenticity in it. Not like, of course, the sweeping work of Neruda, or the very crisp work of Nelly Sachs. It's absolutely amazing. I had I shouldn't be saying this, but no one will believe me, spiritual experiences reading her work on the beaches of Manuri outside Mumbai. Actually, it was so amazing that whatever she was writing about was virtually happening in front of me, completely, I don't know, by accident or what. It's the power. And hers is memory. Hers is a very, very powerful emphasis on memory. The memory that she had of losing her parents, not her mom, her dad, and other family members to the Nazis, and how she converted all of that pain into a personal vision of liberation. I think that is that's what a lot of poets could be doing right now. There's so much happening in the world and happening to us. We're brutalized. Yeah.
Santoshji, who are the poets that impacted you?
Actually, when I was a kid, I was very, very fascinated by Edward Lear and Edgar Allan Poe and all. Later on, I started reading a lot of poetry. My father, he was a professor in the English department, and he used to read out poetry of T.S. Eliot, and he had his PhD in Robert Browning. So Robert Browning also influenced me a lot. And these days, I'm reading this, and I'm Adil Jaswala's Tattooed Teetotaler, and I'm just fascinated by the way he has written this. So I would recommend this book to everyone. It's a book of nonsense verse, and I just love the sense in the nonsense there. So I keep reading a lot, and I keep getting influenced by writers all the time.
Right. I definitely see a resurgence of poetry.
Yes.
That poetry is no longer. I mean, when we were growing up in school and college in the 80s and 90s, poetry somehow had gotten relegated to the syllabus, right?
Yeah.
Poetry was meant only for school. Oh, and one had to study poetry structurally, all of that. And that was the only time one encountered poetry in one's own life. But now I think there has been a resurgence of poetry. It's no longer confined to the syllabus. The new generation is actively taking part in it, writing it, whether it be through spoken word performances or blogs or forums, like for example, Sab Yaad Rakha Jayega by Amir Aziz, which is absolutely fabulous, with over 3 million views. Um, do you think that the future of poetry is safe in the hands of future generations?
I would think poetry is, I wouldn't ever use the word safe for poetry. Poetry will always be vulnerable,
Dangerous.
will always be walking on ice, will always be a minefield. Poetry will always be that way. But what's good is poetry is alive and well. Let's put it that way. Tomorrow it may be hit by the virus, but right now it's alive and well. All of the experimentation is necessary. It's really necessary.
Santoshji?
Right now, Anirban, I believe that poetry is kicking. There are so many young poets I come across every day, and they write beautiful poetry. I don't want to say that they are not writing poetry, but they are writing beautiful poetry.
Her network, I think, is having a
I
bit of
have
an
come
issue.
across a wonderful poet, and some not so wonderful poets too.
Right.
Some not so wonderful poets who think a world of their poetry, and they send you the manuscripts for writing forwards, and the entire manuscript is all awry. It is syntactically challenged and whatnot, but they think the world of themselves, and they are in a hurry to get their poetry published. The
Hmm.
youngsters, some of them. So I want, especially the youngsters, to know that they should not be in a hurry to get their poetry published. They should at least sit on their poetry for at least 2 years at least. Keep editing, honing, culling, and then come out with the best poetry that they have ever written.
But Bakaya, the thing is of youth. That's what's so beautiful about youth. Where we're always in a hurry. I was always in a hurry, but when I got over there, I said, "Oh my God, is this what it is all about?" It's in the nature of youth to be in a hurry.
I should have done that, or I should have written it that way. And oh, this line could have been changed. That idea always comes so late, after
Yeah, yeah.
it's gone to print. Um,
Right.
I think we have time, to take some. Yeah, we can do some Q&A. I think at this point, Mr. Khare, political and religious censorship can really wreak havoc on the minds and emotions of writers everywhere. What is the solution? Play safe or write on and be censored, which is self-defeating?
See, personally, I don't think a poet should become a schemester, to say very powerful things in a roundabout way. So if you need to say something, you need to say it because you are answering that voice inside you, that imperative to revolt, to stand up and say something, to say it because you have been chosen to say it. Otherwise, you're a fraud, basically. So if you have it, if you're charged with what to say it. Truth
संतोष जी,
prevails.
आपका क्या ख्याल है?
Yeah. We should not be schemesters. We should not be schemesters. We should pour our heart out. This is what I too do.
Right. I think we have another question from viewer. Santosh ma'am, you have an incredible sense of humor. Do you think that being a Mad Hatter helps in touching more readers than serious philosophical sermons? Would you change your style for anything? I hope your answer is an emphatic no. मैं answer कर देता हूँ. No.
Yeah.
Emphatic no.
Yes, I'm in fact, no. Anirban will vouch for that. He is a stand-up comedian, and I do my comedy sitting.
Correct.
I do my comedy sitting. So you have read this. This is sheer madness, And
It is.
but even in madness, there is a streak of sanity. You'll vouch for that, Anirban. You've read it.
Yes, yes, I have read it, and I was also one of the young people who sent you my book of poems to write forward. I hope you weren't referring to my work as being shoddy.
Oh, it's a beautiful book, beautifully edited, beautifully proofread, and wonderful. And the poems are wonderful, incredibly wonderful, honestly. And that's
Thank you,
a very, very
Baj
honest.
gaye, baj gaye, baj gaye, baj gaye, baj gaye.
Yeah.
There's one more question from someone who calls himself Normal Baba. I would like to know at least one poem that the eminent speakers have kept close to their respective hearts. One poem.
Is it a poem by some other poet or a
Yes,
poem by
yes.
the?
Yeah, I would think, or maybe let's go with your poem, your own poem. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. See, the theme of this book of poems, Traveling Light, is really to be, as much as we say, we talk about having burdens. We're
Mm-hmm,
burdened down by things, and to unburden ourselves, we need to travel light. And if you travel light, you travel far.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. So this book of poems is actually about all my memories, not necessarily sordid memories, happy memories, beautiful memories,
mm-hmm.
encouraging memories, humorous memories, sharing all of them so one travels lighter. And in this, there's one poem, which is the theme poem, which is Traveling Light. And that is possibly my most personal poem. And it talks about, I'm not going to read it unless it's wanted to be read. I will just talk about it. Is that okay?
Please read it. Please read
Sorry?
it, sir. Please
Okay.
read it.
Please.
Okay, fine. I'll read it. Uh, yeah, one sec. Here I am. Here. Okay. Traveling light. Spawned in a factory town up north, one monsoon evening smelling green, rain roots trailing fecund dark, sky flowering lightning sheen. The old man of the house stood out beneath a mango tree, listening to his grandson's cries, wind riding to be free. From town to dusty town and city, we traveled searching for a home, shallow roots that clung to gravel, wrenched and forced to roam. We lived in mansions, lived in shacks, and learned to celebrate hope like stripped fish bones that lay in piles upon a plate. 5 decades and a half gone by, I look back to that day, tossed in rain and burning green, and my cry that was blown away. I'm grateful for the hurt, the loss, the homelessness, and pain. It's helped me travel lighter now, singing in the rain.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so
It's
much
not
for
a
sharing.
sad poem, actually. It's rejoicing in everything that life has thrown at me.
Right. It's got a sense of reminisce and it's got a sense of nostalgia, but happy memories.
Yes, and however sordid they were, they're seen in a certain light because
It's
that's
almost
what
like the yeah, it's almost like the rain has washed away all the sordidness that was there. You know.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Super. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lalit has a question. What do you think of the Victorian influence of poetry on modern poets?
On modern poets in India or
I
anywhere.
guess. I guess let's talk about India.
Yeah, all right. I'm not too sure. Maybe earlier there was a lot of influence of Victorian poetry on poets, but I don't see much of it now at all. In fact, it was around
Right.
independence, pre-independence, independence. We still had quite a lot of Victorian influences, but after that, we threw it all away. I think.
Hmm. I think
Of
also
course,
that the
P.
sorry.
Lal's Writers' Workshop, P. Lal's Writers' Workshop did encourage a certain Victorianism in the books he published,
Yes.
but
In
that
Kolkata.
was yes, yes, Lake
He
Gardens.
yeah, yeah. P. Lal legend.
Yes, he
Absolute
was my
legend.
professor actually. So
Oh,
yeah, he was, I
lovely.
think, a better professor than a publisher because I never missed a single lecture of his.
Xavier's.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we've come. I think Santosh ji is having some connectivity issues. So we're going to end this session now with some good news, um, which I've been wanting to share for a bit now, and also justify my hosting this session. It will
Go
somehow
on, go for it.
justify. So my first collection of 44 poems called Mumblings and Musings is being published by Petals Publishers. If we can share the cover, Miraj, if you can share the cover, that will be great. 44 poems called Mumblings and Musings, being published by Petals Publishers, and it will be available online and in bookstores in a week's time. I want to thank Mr. Harpreet Makar, owner of Petals, for believing in the power of poetry and for continuing to support the publication of poetry when the naysayers say, "Arey yaar, poetry to bikta nahi hai." I also want to thank Suhail Mathur and the book bakers for representing this book and me, of course, and for making the dream of a wannabe poet come true. And finally, a huge thank you to Manjari Prabhu for allowing me to share the first glimpse of the cover with you. मिराज और एक बार हो जाए कवर यार दिखा दे it's coming out soon. Finally, we come to the end. I want to share a favorite quote of mine. It's from a film called Dead Poet Society, which of course was first a book by N.H. Kleinbaum. In it, the character who's the professor called John Keating, he says, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for."
Wow. Yeah.
So thank you, Pune International Literary Festival 2021, for having all of us here, and for believing in the power of the poem, about the spoken word, about the written word, about poetry. We want to thank Manjari Prabhu and her team at the PILF. I want to thank both my guests here today. Without you, this session would have been absolutely colorless. I wish Santoshji was around. I think she's having a bit of a problem with connectivity. But thank you so much for joining us, viewers. I hope you enjoyed the session, and we shall be back again next year with another edition of PILF 2022. Till then, see you. Adios. Take care. God bless. Tashidale.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. We thank Randhir Khare, Suhit Kelkar, Dr. Santosh Bakaya, and Anirban Bhattacharya for being our guests at PILF 2021. Thank you.